is a real Tuscan hearty stew called peposo. And it's called peposo and it means tile maker stew. And I'll tell you the story as we're going along. But before we begin the story, let me begin the process. And to make this stew, this beef stew, you need some vegetables. And so we want to chop up just very coarsely because we're going to do this in the food processor. You want to have an onion, just quartered. Throw in an onion, and I love doing an onion in the food processor because then I don't have to cry. So that goes in, and a carrot, just coarsely chopped up, put that in, and a couple stalks of celery goes in. And then with that, we want those herbs. But first let me get this pulverized a little bit before I put the herbs in because I don't want to mash them down too much. So pulse, this should be a fairly fine mixture because this is what the Italians call the odori. These are the flavoring agents that are going to give this stew its wonderful taste. Now we want to put those herbs and we want to put some garlic in. So 4 cloves of whole garlic goes in. And then several leaves of fresh basil. Now, you know what I told you. It's really critical that you use fresh herbs for this because dried herbs just don't have any more oils. A little bit of parsley, about 2 tablespoons of parsley. You want some fresh thyme, about 2 tablespoons of that. And then fresh rosemary needles go in, about 1 tablespoon. And some margarine goes in, and some fresh sage, about 4 leaves, and some mint, about 4 or 5 leaves of those go in. So you can start to say to yourself, well, this is going to be pretty flavorful. So now we want to put the top back on, and if you don't have a food processor, well then you are doing this by hand. So now we get this into a fine mince, just like that, and those are the odori. Now what we can do is take this out, and in here I've got my olive oil all ready to go. So we want to put all the vegetables in the pot and let that go. So now we need the meat, and here we're just using a beef stew. A beef stew meat that we cut up into 1-inch pieces, or if you want to make it smaller than that, you can do that as well, and then the cooking time will be less. And the first thing you have to do when you have meat like this, if you're making a stew, is drying off the meat so that it's going to brown nicely once you put it into the pan. So when you get it, take some paper towels and go around and dry all of the meat well so that you get most of those meat juices absorbed into the towel. So it's fairly dry. And for this recipe, we want about 1 3/4 pounds of good beef stew that has been trimmed of any fat. Okay, this is looking good. So now I'm going to take it out with a slotted spoon and put it into a bowl. And we're going to be putting these vegetables back in the pan after we brown the meat. Seems like a lot, doesn't it? But when this is cooking in the oven, it's going to give a wonderful smell to your kitchen. Now, if the pan seems a little bit dry, add a little bit more olive oil. I'm going to put a little bit more in now. And make sure you're using a pan that is large enough to accommodate the pieces in one layer so that everything is going to brown very nicely. Turn my pan around. And now put our meat in. Let me just mix this a little bit. And now all of the meat goes into the pot. And we want to brown that well. We'll put this aside. Get the meat going. And at this point, we can give it a little bit of salt. And I like to use sea salt for this. I think sea salt has a much nicer flavor. Now, while that's cooking down, let me tell you about what else goes in with this. We're going to be using, believe it or not, pears. And we're going to mash up 1 pear. This is a pear that I've already peeled before you came over. We're going to be adding this a little later on, and I've put a little bit of lemon juice in with the pear to keep it from turning brown. And actually, this is a dish that you could make early in the day, or you could make the day before, because as you know, stew that sits around really tastes better the next day. So one pear, a very ripe pear that you've mashed up either with a fork or pureed in a food processor. And we're going to add that layer. Peel two not super ripe pears, but not underripe pears either. Something that you can just peel very easily with a vegetable peeler. If you want to use a small knife, do that. And we want to dice this up. We want to dice these pears up, and we're going to add them at the end of the cooking process. Then cut the pears in half, core them, and I like to use a little melon scoop for that. Get the core right out, then just dice them up into small pieces. Put them in a bowl and add a little bit of lemon juice with water, and that'll keep those pears from turning brown. But you know, this is going to go in a stew, so it really doesn't matter too much in this particular recipe. Okay, that's looking good. Now we can put the wine in. So we want a cup of Vin Santo. So the Vin Santo goes in. I've got that on high, and I want to burn off, as I say, I want to cook off half of that. Now we want to add some salt and pepper to this along with the Vin Santo. And I'm going to zest up some lemon here. And all you do is take your lemon and go over the zester, and it gives you a very fine grating of the lemon zest without taking the pith with it, which is really the very bitter part of the lemon, and you really wouldn't want this in your stew. So you see how fine a job that does, and then you can just shake it out and you've got great lemon zest. And while I'm at it, why don't I cut up this lemon and give my pears a little bit of lemon juice so that they don't turn brown on me. Let's go back here and see what's happening. This is starting to smell absolutely wonderful, and it's time now to add back the vegetables. So all of our odori go in and spread that around evenly, and then we want to cover the meat with the hot beef broth. So now the beef broth goes in, and make sure you have enough that covers the meat. Then that's really all there is to it for a little while. So you want to cover that, and then you put it in a 225-degree oven. This is the point at which we add the pureed pear. That goes in. So that goes in, the cover goes back on, and this goes back in the oven to cook for another hour and a half.